Hello, welcome back to my channel. I feel like I'm not in focus. If you're new here, my name is Allie and today we're doing another mystery video. Now, I do want to address a couple things that I've noticed in my last two mystery videos that I really would like to work on. The first one being, I was looking that way a lot, and the reason I was is because I was reading off of my monitor. I didn't have a script, but I did have some notes, and in order to get the best quality information, I was trying to read off of that. In the future, I'm going to either read off my phone or read off a piece of paper so that you guys aren't seeing that, because I felt like it was really distracting, just like in my personal opinion. I've also changed the background a little bit, which I feel like is a little less distracting, at least in my opinion. And I'm also going to work on getting better quality information, because I felt like in my last two, it wasn't that I was ashamed of the information that I was given, but I really want to make an effort to make it the most well-researched videos that you can find. I have a master's degree in information science, libraries and information sciences, which means, at least in my case, my specialty, if you will, was like navigating research. So for me, it feels disingenuous of me to just go on Wikipedia and find that information. In this case, I didn't, but I could have done a lot more. So I just want to let you know that I'm really going to work on that for my next mystery videos. If you have any mystery videos that you would like to see, please put them down below. I'm going to try to do them once a month in conjunction with my beauty videos. But yeah, also I will try to list everything that's on my face right now if you're interested. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and get started, because today the mystery that I wanted to talk about is one of my favorite mysteries of all time. Actually the last three videos I've done have not been murder mysteries. Those tend to be my favorite. I really do enjoy true crime, but this is much more of a mystery that's layered in a lot of conspiracy theories. So if you're someone that isn't into conspiracy theories, I'm going to tell you right now that you should probably just head on out because you're not going to be into this. This is just a mystery that's layered in a lot of different conspiracy elements, and we'll get to it more in depth. I've watched a lot of videos on this topic in particular. I will try to make sure I'm linking my research down below. Oh my gosh, did I not? I don't think I linked even my research to myself, so that's a problem. But I actually looked at like some of the autopsy reports and things because I really wanted to get a good grasp on this topic. So anyway, we are going to be talking about Dyatlov'S Pass. So if you're not familiar with Dyatlov'S Pass, it's referring to an incident that is the death of 9 hikers in the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union that disappeared between the 1st and 2nd of February in 1959. The funny thing about this disappearance is all of these hikers were incredibly experienced. They were from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and the way that I understood it was that hikers at this institute had to do certain things to achieve certain levels, and I believe that the 9 hikers in this group were attempting to become like the highest level of hiker that you could be. I think it was like a level 3. So these people knew what they were doing. So keep that in mind as we're going through this story, that like these people have hiked before. They knew what they were doing. They established camp their last days at what is now known as Dyatlov'S Pass. They named it after the leader of the group. His name was Igor, but then he was known as Kholat Syakal. And please keep in mind, I am not Russian. This all takes place in what is now Russia, so please excuse my accent. So sometime during the night, something caused them to flee their tent. They said that the tent was cut from the inside, and it was obvious that they were frantically trying to leave because none of them were dressed for the sub-zero temperatures that they were going to encounter when they went outside. Again, they were all experienced hikers, so pretty odd. After their bodies were discovered, it was found by the Soviet Union government that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 died from some sort of physical trauma. We will talk more about the government aspect of it a little bit later, But keep that in mind. That was the Soviet Union's findings. One had a fractured skull, one had some sort of chest trauma. But the weirdest part of all of this is one of them was missing their eyes and missing their tongue. Weird. The investigation was concluded that some unknown force had caused this trauma. There were several things about what happened to these hikers. There are several theories about what happened to these hikers. And we've just scratched the surface of what happened. That's just like the basic premise of what happened. We'll get more into like the days leading up to it. Actually, we'll do that now. The group was formed. We'll talk about the theories after because I just feel like the theories are like the guts. That's not a good word, but the big cool thing about this case. There's nothing cool. Like I need to work on my attitude as well because like this is cool to me, but also people died. So I'm not saying that them dying is cool. Like I think that it's horrible that they died. I feel so bad for their families. They did nothing to deserve this, but like, okay, I just need to work on it, okay? So in 1959, the group was formed by Igor. Okay, so all of them were category 2 hikers and skiers, and they were doing this trek to complete category 3 certifications, which is the highest possible category. The goal of the expedition was to reach Ererton, which was only 6.2 miles away from where the hikers were found. The group arrived by train to Ivdel, where they then rode by truck to Vizay. Here it is said they ate several loaves of bread in order to like carb up for the coming hike. That's like very common, or at least it is in the marathon world. I'm assuming it's the same in the hiking world. So their trek began on January 27th, and by January 28th, there was originally 10 members. One of them, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back. He had a heart condition. He had some other issues that just he knew that he wouldn't be able to make it. So that left them with 9 hikers. Because of the diaries and the cameras and stuff like that was left behind, the investigators were able to track their movements. Like, thank God they wouldn't have been able to track them otherwise, because you'll see why. On January 31st, they were preparing to climb the mountain, so the biggest part of the ascent. On February 1st, they began to move through the pass, which is now known as Dyatlov'S Pass, but they were diverged from the course because of bad weather. It's theorized that even though they were farther west than what was intended, there was a forest 0.93 miles down where they could have found respite for storm, but instead they decided to make shelter in the pass in order to not lose the altitude that they had gained, which kind of makes sense, right? Altitude sickness is like a huge thing. So if they would have went down to the woods, they would have been climbing back up, fighting the altitude. It was already planned that Dyatlov would send a telegram on the 12th when the mission was complete, but according to Yudin, Dyatlov had already theorized that they would be delayed. However, by the 20th, the families demanded a search party. They were like, it's been 8 days since they were supposed to send a telegram. Even if they were delayed, like, this is a big delay. At first, the search parties were just volunteers, but later the military became involved, like sending planes and helicopters, all that stuff. On February 26th, the camp was found, and that's when they discovered how badly damaged the camp itself was. Mikhail Sherevin, the student who found the tent, said, and I quote, "The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty and all of the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind." Keep that in mind. Investigators said that the tent had been cut open from the inside. 8 or 9 sets of footprints were found, all of which were made by feet that were only wearing socks or were barefoot, that could be found leading to the edge of the nearby woods. That is the woods that I talked about that was 0.93 miles away, that they didn't want to camp in. So that's the woods that they were heading towards. After 500 meters, these tracks were covered in snow. At the forest edge, volunteers found the remains of a fire. That's where they found the first 2 victims, found only in their underwear. Now, we talked about paradoxical undressing in the Ridges video. We're going to talk about it again today. Paradoxical undressing is such an interesting concept to me. And it's interesting because, like, I was telling my husband about this case and about the Ridges case, and he had no idea that paradoxical undressing was a thing. And I was like, yeah, it's, you know, your body, when you're in such a hypothermic state, your body begins to get so cold that it feels hot. So instinctually, they will take off their clothes. Oftentimes, victims will be found with their clothes neatly folded next to them, which I find like so fascinating. That's how Margaret Schilling from the Ridges was found. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. But yeah, they were just found in their underwear. They were the bodies of Krivoshenko and Doroshenko. Okay, so between the Pine and the camp, the searchers found 3 more corpses. Obviously Dyatlov, Kalmo, Gororova, and Slobodin, who seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. It took 2 months to find the 4 remaining travelers. They were finally found on the 4th of May under the 4 meters of snow in a ravine, 75 meters further into the woods from the original pine tree, the one where they found the fire. 3 of those 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that those who had died first had relinquished the clothes of the others, which makes sense. Dubania was wearing Krivoshenko's burned, torn trousers, and her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. After the first 5 bodies were found, the legal inquest started, and it was concluded that the first 5 had died of hypothermia. Although one of the travelers had a head wound, it was concluded that that head wound was not fatal. The examination of the last 4 bodies was kind of what shifted the narrative. And okay, I do want to mention a lot of what I'm going to be reading next is like directly quoted. I'm not trying to steal anything. It was much easier to just directly quote than it was to try to summarize myself. So 3 of the ski hikers had fatal injuries. Thibaut Brignoles had major skull damage, and both Zabinia and Solitaire had major chest fractures. According to Dr. Boris Vozrozhdeny, the force required to cause such damage that would have been extremely high. They compared it to the force of a car crash. Keep that in mind. Notably, the bodies with no external wounds associated with the bone fractures. Keep that in mind. No external wounds, yet the inside had the same force of a car crash. However, major external injuries were found on Dubania, who was missing her tongue, her eyes, parts of her lips, as well as facial tissue and a fragment of her skull bone. She also had extensive skin maceration on the hands, and it was claimed that Dubania was found lying face down in a small stream that ran under the snow, that her external injuries were in line with putrefaction in a wet environment and were likely associated with her death. Again, these were the findings of the government. We'll get into more of that later. It was initially thought that the Mansi tribe had found and killed the hikers because, of course, let's blame the natives, as usual. But this was later found not to be the case because it didn't indicate a hand-to-hand struggle. Even though they had so many physical injuries, traumatic injuries, it was found that it wasn't caused by like hand-to-hand combat. Journalists reporting on the available parts of the inquest files claim that it states 6 of the group members died of hypothermia and 3 had fatal injuries, and that's what killed them. There were no indications of people nearby on Kholat Syakhl, which is now known as Dyatlov'S Pass, apart from the 9 travelers. The tent had been ripped from within. The victims had died 6 to 8 hours from their last meal. It's safe to assume that at some point they either ate in the tent or they made a fire to eat. Traces from the camp showed that all group members left on their own accord, which I don't know what that means. I think it just means that no one dragged them out. And something interesting, and this is the theory that I'm going to dive into the most later, but on one of the victims, high levels of radiation were found on their clothing. Interesting. To dispel the theory that the indigenous people were the ones that attacked them, Vozrozhdeny stated that the fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by another human being because of the forces that had been too strong and no soft tissue damaged. Released documents contain no information about the condition of the skiers' internal organs, which was strange. And obviously there were no survivors of the incident except for the guy that dipped out. Funny enough, this case has gained a lot of traction in the last few years. And I think it's because we put a lot of attention on the Russian government in general and like the corruption of the Russian government, which is just like my theory about that. But there's been a lot of pressure to find out what really happened in this case. So on April 12th, 2018, the body of Zolotarev was exhumed upon the initial of journalists of the Russian tabloid, name on the screen. Contradictory results were obtained. One of the experts stated, and this is kind of a direct quote again, not direct, but like I directly am taking this from an article. One of the experts stated that the character of the injuries resembled a person knocked down by a car, and the DNA analysis did not reveal any similarity to the DNA of his living relatives. Now, in addition, it turned out that the name Semyon Zolotarev is not on the list of the buried at Ivanovskoye Cemetery. Nevertheless, the reconstruction of the face from the exhumed skull agrees with the post-war photographs of Semyon, although journalists expressed suspicion that another person was hiding under the name of Semyon Zolotarev after the war. So basically what they're saying is that they don't think that that body is one of the 9 that passed away. For 3 years, the pass was closed, but it did eventually reopen for other hikers. It's currently open now. And as recently as February this year, it was announced that Russia was reopening the case, but it's still not being treated like a criminal investigation, and people are incredibly critical of Russia investigating pretty much anything. So the only possibilities that they're now considering are avalanche, a hurricane, or a snow slab. This is the part, okay? This is the part that really fucked with me. Like when I was reading up on all this stuff, when I was watching a lot of videos, this was the thing that I just wanted to know more about. And this is what prompted me to look up their actual autopsy reports, because it was very interesting. So a witness that attended one of the funerals, it was a 12-year-old boy, he claims that all of the hikers, and I will mention, as far as I know, I didn't see any contradicting evidence of this, all of the hikers were white, they were Caucasian, but yet all of them had a deep, deep dark tan. And I'm not talking about like, you know, when you go skiing and you get a little bit of a tan. No, they had deep dark skin. Like skin was a completely different color. So this leads me to what another group of hikers found on that same day, like the night of the incident. They claimed that they saw large orange spheres about 50 kilometers south of the incident. Or sorry, they were 50 meters south, and they, to the north, saw large orange spheres in the sky. Similar spheres were observed in Ebates and adjacent areas continually during the period of February and March 1959 by various independent witnesses, including meteorology service and the military. However, none of this was noted in the initial investigation. No one wrote it down. It was only found out later that it was even something that was reported. So in 1967, Dyatlov'S writer and journalist Yuri Yerevi published the novel Of the Highest Degree of Complexity. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to read this book. I'm working on it, guys. I will make sure that I'm reading all the information, okay? It was inspired by the incident. Yerevi had been involved in the search of Dyatlov'S group, and he was the official photographer of the inquest. The book was written during the Soviet era, so everything was a secret during, that time period or whatever. And he avoided revealing anything beyond what was factual, which makes sense. It definitely romanticized the accident. Allegedly, I haven't read it. And it gave a much more optimistic view of the incident. They say that he had alternate versions of this novel though, but both were declined because of censorship. So and then here's another interesting fact. Since his death in 1980, none of his journals, none of his manuscripts, nothing has ever been found. So, interesting. There was also another person that wrote a book. So this one is interesting. It's called The Price of State Secrets is 9 Lives, and it's by Anatoly Gushin. And this work was criticized for its concentration on a speculative theory of a secret weapon experiment, but it led to a public discussion of what could have possibly happened that day that wasn't previously discussed. And it also stimulated an interest in the paranormal, which we'll get to. Many of those who had remained silent for many, many years, after this book was published, they came forward again. And one of them was a former police officer, Lev Ivanov, who it led to an official inquest in 1959. In 1990, he published an article which included his admission that the investigation team had no rational explanation for the incident. He also stated that after his team reported that they had seen flying spears, he then received direct orders from high-ranking regional officials to dismiss this claim. Just listen, Lev. Just fucking forget it, okay? Just forget it. In 2000, a regional television company produced the documentary film The Mystery of Dyatlov'S, and with the help of a film crew, a writer, they published a fiction documentary novel of the same name. A large part of the book is like direct quotations of the case, diaries of victims, interviews, all that stuff. And the narrative line of the book details the everyday life and thoughts of a modern woman and attempts to dissolve the case. So, But despite its fictional narrative, it remains the largest source of documentary materials about the case itself, because it was like the most that had ever gone public about the case. Now that we're in the age of like crime sleuths, and again, I think this is really cool, a lot of information is now coming out. That's how we have access to autopsy reports. That's how we have access to so many things, is strictly because of this case. So in 1999, the Dyatlov Foundation was established, and this foundation, its aim was to continue investigating the case, and it does maintain a museum that preserves the memory of the hikers. And then in 2016, they also put up a monument to honor Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor of the expedition group, which is really nice. I think that's really nice. And I do want to mention though, he's technically not the sole survivor. He just left early. It's not like he survived the incident, but that's neither here nor there. So the initial most popular theory was that there was an avalanche. However, this was questioned, and so I'll read, there's a direct quote from someone named, he's a skeptic author. They say he's like into Yeti research, so take this with a grain of salt. His name is Benjamin Radford. He says that this is the most plausible thing that could have happened. The group woke up in a panic and cut their way out of the tent, either because of an avalanche had covered the entrance of their tent or because they were scared that an avalanche was imminent. Better to have a potentially repairable slit in a tent than risk being buried alive in it under tons of snow. They were poorly clothed because they'd been sleeping and ran to the safety of the nearby woods where trees would have helped slow oncoming snow. In the darkness of night, they got separated in 2 or 3 groups. One group made a fire, hence the burned hands, while the others tried to return to the tent to recover their clothing since the danger had apparently passed. But it was too cold, and they all froze to death before they could locate their tent in the darkness. At some point, some of the clothes may have been recovered or swapped from the dead, but at any rate, the group of 4, whose bodies were most severely damaged, were caught in an avalanche and buried under 4 meters, 13 feet of snow, more than enough to account for the compelling natural force the medical examiner described. Jubania's tongue was likely removed by scavengers and ordinary predation. Now, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was not, in fact, an avalanche, though. Let's get into that. So this location had no obvious signs that any avalanche had in fact taken place. There would have been certain patterns, there would have been certain debris, all this stuff that would have suggested that there had been an avalanche. Considering that if the party was killed by an avalanche, there would have been a significant amount of snow on top of them and a significant amount of snow in the area that would have, been enough to push them away and cause that much trauma. And they were found under an incredibly shallow layer of snow, which meant that like basically a little bit of snow had fallen to cover their bodies. And also they did mention that like this would have caused even more severe injuries than what they had, like if this had been a true avalanche. And over 100 expeditions to this region were held since the incident, and none of them have reported incidents of an avalanche or incidents that could potentially create an avalanche. And then also you can do, this is what they did with Roanoke, like you can go back and do like terrain studies or whatever to indicate like what kind of like weather phenomenon had happened. It's a physics thing. And they concluded that there had not been an avalanche in this area. And the conditions were like not suitable for an avalanche during that time. So they also analyzed the terrain, and they concluded that the way that the mountain was shaped, the altitude, all of that stuff, the avalanche wouldn't have even hit the tent. Like it would have gone in a completely different direction. Dyatlov himself was an incredibly skilled skier, as was Semyon Zolotarev. Neither of these men would have been likely to camp anywhere in the path of a potential avalanche. They were too smart for that. And footprints, patterns leading away from the tent, let alone 9 people, did not indicate that they were running from that kind of danger. In fact, which this actually contradicts what the Soviet Union had found. They said that it was consistent with individuals walking away at a normal pace. Interesting. Now, there was a repeated investigation in 2015, because like I said, in the past few years, this case has really taken off again. So this was done by the request of the families. So they did confirm that weather that night was incredibly harsh, like negative 50 degrees Celsius or something like that. Like crazy, crazy, crazy bad weather, horrible wind speed, not good, which definitely contributed to potentially how someone could die of hypothermia. So they basically reconstructed it as this. Again, I'm reading directly from someone else's work, not my own words. Keep that in mind. So on February 1st, the group arrived at Kholat-Syakhl Mountain. They erected a large 9-person tent on an open slope without any natural barriers such as a forest. On the day and a few preceding days, a heavy snowfall continued with strong wind and frost. The group traversing the slope and digging in the tent in the snow weakens the snow base, and during the night the snow field above the tent started to slide down, pushing on the tent fabric. The group probably woke up and evacuated in a panic. Some of the attendees were able to put on warm clothes while others weren't. All escaped through a hole in the tent fabric, and the whole group goes down the slope and finds a place perceived as safe from the avalanche 1,500 meters down. 2 of the people in the group, only in their underwear and pajamas, were found at the Siberian pine tree, and that group made a fire pit close to the tree. It was believed that the surviving members took their clothes to protect themselves from the cold. Their bodies were found first and were confirmed to die of hypothermia. 3 hikers, including Dyatlov, attempted to climb back to the tent, possibly to get sleeping bags, warmer clothes, all of that stuff. But their bodies were found at various places ranging from 300 meters to 600 meters from the camp, in poses suggesting that they fell down from literal exhaustion. The remaining 4, equipped with warm clothes and footwear, were apparently trying to find or build a better camping site. But they were found only 70 meters from the fire under several meters of thick layer of snow, which indicated that they fell into a snow hole formed by a stream. So these were independent, by the way. This is the investigative committee of the Russian Federation. They're independent, but they're still part of the Russian government. they contributed to the tragedy were extreme weather conditions. They also said, and this kind of pissed me off, okay? This investigative committee claimed that part of it was the inexperience of Dyatlov. He was getting ready to be a category 3 hiker and he was like a master skier. But it said that he was inexperienced in these really bad weather conditions. I don't believe that. So another theory is something called Ebates wind. I didn't know what the fuck this was. So I was like, what the fuck is Ebates wind? It's basically like a hurricane in the snow and like off the coast and in a mountain. They are very rare. Very rare. So they're extremely violent, and there was a similar case in Sweden, I guess, which made them think that it was possibly Ebates wind. Now, it does indicate that the weather that night was very similar to that incident in Eden, or Sweden, not Eden, what the fuck, okay. So very similar to what happened in Sweden. Now, sudden katabatic wind, it would have made it impossible to stay in the tent. And so it would make more sense for them to seek shelter in the tree line. There was also a flashlight left on top of the tent, which indicated that they used that as light so they could find their way back to the tent once the winds had subsided. So the expedition proposed that the group of hikers constructed 2 bivouac shelters. I'll put a picture of what that looks like. One of which collapsed, leaving 4 of the 4 hikers buried under snow. So I have to admit, when I was doing this research, those 3 theories were bullshit to me. It just did not make sense that it was weather related, especially some of the other information that I found out. It just didn't make sense for it to be a weather related incident. So Donnie Eicher wrote a book called Dead Mountains, there's a phenomenon called infrasound, which again, I read that and I was like, what is that? And basically it could have created a Kármán vortex street, which can reduce infrasound capable of inducing panic attacks in humans. It's something that you can't really, from what I understand, you can't really hear it. It's more of something you feel. How, you know those dog whistles? It's kind of like that from what I understand. It's proposed that it could have been generated by wind as it passed over the Halachal Mountains, and it would have caused like physical discomfort and like emotional distress within the hikers. Because of their panic, they were driven to leave the tent by whatever means necessary, not giving a shit what they were wearing, nothing. They wanted to get away from the noise. And even if they could have regained composure and gone back, at that point it would have been too late, because they were going to die of hypothermia, because it was negative 50 degrees Celsius outside. So they also said it was possible that like in their panic they stumbled over a ravine or something, which would have caused their injuries. This is much more plausible to me than the weather theory, and a lot of the evidence indicates that it was something along these lines. But listen, I'm going to tell you my favorite theory. I'm going to. And if the FBI comes after me, if the Russian government comes after me, please do. What have I got to lose? Listen, I'm a small town librarian, okay? I do this for fun. I'm not here to expose anybody. The 30 people that are probably going to watch this, we're not going to start a coup, okay? I wish. But here I am. Come at me, okay? So this one is my favorite theory, because it is suggested that this camp fell in the same path of something called the Soviet parachute mine exercises. This theory alleges that the hikers, woken by loud explosions, which they could have thought was an avalanche, fled the tent in a shoeless, shell-shocked panic, because all of the evidence does suggest that whatever reason they fled, that they were scared. Whatever reason there was for them to flee, they were really frightened. So after And then after fleeing, they found themselves unable to return for a supply retrieval mission. After some members froze to death attempting to endure the bombardment, others commandeered their clothing only to be fatally injured by subsequent parachute mine concussions. There were indeed records of these parachute mine explosions in the area around the time that the miners were there. So what happens is the parachute mines explode while they're still in the air, and rather than like upon striking the Earth's surface, and they could produce injuries very similar to what happened to the hikers. So they also said specifically with these types of explosions, the injuries are all internal. Most of the time there's no external injuries, whereas like if you drop a bomb, there could be shrapnel. If you drop a nuclear bomb, there would be other things. So basically, this does very heavily line up with the type of trauma that they experienced. This also coincides with those glowing orbs that people were seeing. It could have potentially been the mines. So this theory uses scavenging animals to explain Dubina's injury. Some speculate that the bodies were unnaturally manipulated due to characteristic livor mortis markings discovered during autopsy, as well as burns to the hair and skin. Basically meaning that someone manipulated the bodies to get the incident to look like something else. And there's also something else that's very interesting. So the tent that they found was incorrectly erected. Now, I've mentioned several times that these hikers were very experienced. Why would they have erected the tent incorrectly? Weird, huh? So, a similar theory alleges that they may have been testing some sort of radioactive material near the area. And this is also supported by the evidence that, what was I saying? Oh, by the fact that one of them had radioactive material still on their clothing. The other thing that I want to mention is that, oh fuck, my battery's low. I hope I can make it through. So another thing I wanted to mention is that family and friends, so I already mentioned the 12-year-old that said the body looked deep dark tan. There were other family members, and also it was reported in the autopsy that their skin was bright orange. Listen, this is in LA in 2010. They weren't getting spray tanned. Why would their skin have been bright orange? Odd, huh? And they also said that they had gray hair and that they did not have gray hair when they left. How odd. But they did say that if they were killed by some sort of radioactive material, that it would have affected their equipment more than it had. So you do have to take that with a grain of salt. But I do think it's really freaking weird that they were orange. I just think that that's so odd. They do say that like it's possible that the skin color and the gray hair were caused by mummification. I don't know. So this was also supported by the suppression of the files. People were like, why were you suppressing the files so hard? Which is what led them to mostly be released by like 1980. And like I said, they paradoxically undressed. So even if they didn't die from the radiation, they obviously fled for some reason and then died of hypothermia. So I do want to talk about the pseudoscientific theories. I'm not going to go into these too heavily. If you believe in these, I'm cool with that. I'm an alien believer 100%. I think it is so egotistical to be a human and think that there's no life on another planet. Like, I think that is so odd. Like, how egotistical are you to honestly believe that like there's not life on other planets? However, I don't know if I believe in this case that this was some sort of alien thing. I don't believe it. I also don't know if I believe in the Yeti. That's a huge theory. Like the biggest theory that is pseudoscientific is that they were killed by the Yeti. The only real evidence that supports this is the fact that they said that if it was a person that killed them, it would have had to have been someone with superhuman strength. Which the Yeti's a big motherfucker, okay? So honestly, that's all the information I have. This case is so interesting to me. Nothing conclusive has been found though. Even with all this information, they haven't come forward and said this is the reason. The evidence that I gave you, it's all that they have, man. So I'd love to see what some of you guys think of what happened at Dyatlov'S Pass. Like I said, I 100% believe that it was a parachute mine explosion or some kind of like radioactive material, some sort of military test gone wrong. And I think the military realized that they messed up and they tried to cover it up. I think that's why the tongue was missing. I think that's why the eyes were missing. So I just realized the tongues and eyes were missing, right? So they didn't see anything, couldn't say anything. They were dead. I don't know why I didn't see that connection before. Like, holy crap. I don't think animals scavenge those. Like, I think they tried to make it look like it was foul play. So I think they just got the wrong people, like, because some of them had the trauma, some people died of hypothermia, and I think they just chose the wrong ones to fuck with. So yeah, that's all I have today, guys. I'm thinking about what to do next, and I'm kind of thinking of doing a murder mystery, and I'm kind of thinking of either doing JonBenet for Christmas or Mara Murray. So let me know which one you like more, or if you have a different idea, let me know down below. But yeah, that's all I have, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video, okay? Stay weird. Bye.